July 30th, 1943, New Georgia, Solomon Islands. The ink is fresh. The handwriting steady despite the artillery that won't stop. Probational officer Toshihiro Oura sits in a foxhole on Munda Point, his diary open on his lap, and writes what will become his last entry. Round him, the earth trembles under American naval bombardment. Above, the sky darkens with enemy aircraft. His anti-aircraft Uni 25mm and 40mm cannons that once defended this airfield is nearly gone. His words are bitter, clinical, the words of a man who finally understands, in short, as present conditions are. It is a defeat. This is not how it was supposed to end. June 1943, 6 weeks earlier, Oura had been confident. The Japanese Empire controlled an arc of islands stretching across the Pacific. Munda Point's airfield was strategic, vital, defendable. His 15th Anti-Aircraft Field Defense Unit under Colonel Shinichi Shirodo was well-trained, disciplined, ready. When American forces landed on nearby Rendova Island on June 30th, Oura recorded it clinically in his diary. Just another battle. Just another opportunity to demonstrate Japanese spirit. But then something changed. The Americans didn't behave like an army. They behaved like a machine. The first sign came with the shelling. Not sporadic, not strategic, constant or a row on July 7th. The shelling commences at 8. I went about unconcerned, lying down when some shells burst 30 to 40 meters away from me, which caused me to jump out of my breeches. He tried to maintain perspective, tried to believe this was normal warfare. But the shells kept coming, hour after hour, day after day, mountains of them. On July 8th, he received his first and possibly last mail from home. His family wasn't sure he was still alive. The irony wasn't lost on him. What Oura was experiencing wasn't just American firepower. It was American logistics, the unglamorous, systematic machinery that wins wars before the first shot is fired. While Japanese forces scrounged for supplies, rationed ammunition, and watched their soldiers starve on 600 grams of rice per day, the Americans were building an entirely different kind of war. The numbers tell a story that courage cannot rewrite. Japanese military deaths during the Pacific War, an estimated 60% were from starvation, not combat. The Japanese General Staff didn't even have a logistics branch until the war was underway. Transport officers were ineligible for admission to War College. Only 4% of military academy graduates chose logistics course. The very machinery of supply was considered beneath the honor of the warrior class. The Americans, they built ice cream barges, refrigerated ships carrying 64 carloads of frozen meat and 500 tons of fresh produce. 1 pound of supplies per soldier per day minimum. While Japanese infantrymen were told to eat grass during the Yugo offensive in Burma, American troops were complaining about the monotony of having too much food. Oura's diary entries grow shorter. More desperate, enemy planes circle at low altitude. After every reconnaissance flight, shells follow. We are doing our best camouflaging right now, he writes. But the Americans don't need to see them to destroy them. They can afford to shell everything, to bomb everything, to pour resources into probability rather than precision. The contrast is mathematical, brutal, final. German officers during the Battle of the Bulge would later report the same realization watching. American artillery dumped mountains of 155mm shells by the roadside during retreats, as if ammunition itself had no value. German forces calculated every shot. Americans calculated in tonnage. For Oura, the awakening came in stages. First denial, then anger, then the crushing weight of understanding. 3 days before his final entry, Oura writes words that capture the futility. We haven't been fighting, merely dying in the midst of bombs and shelling. The warrior code that sustained him, bushido, spirit over matter, fighting spirit conquering all, meant nothing against an enemy that could simply outlast, outproduce, outdeliver. He reflects on the rear command, the operational staff who planned this defense. My most regretful thought is my grudge toward the forces in the rear and my increasing hatred toward the operational staff in the rear. They think that it is all for the benefit of our country, but Oura knows better now. This isn't warfare. This is systematic destruction. The Americans don't need to outfight them. They just need to keep feeding the machine. Japanese military planning had always assumed certain limitations applied universally. When they struggled to supply forces 220 kilometers from a major base, they assumed the Soviets faced the same constraints. They were wrong. The Soviets launched offensives 600 kilometers from supply bases. When they assumed American aviation strength in 1941, they got it right. When they estimated aircraft production through 1943, they were almost exactly accurate, but they couldn't imagine what those numbers meant in practice. Couldn't conceive of a military culture that treated logistics not as an afterthought, but as the primary weapon. A post-war Japanese officer would write, "No Japanese military student possessing any basic knowledge of military logistics could fail to foresee ultimate defeat for our nation in a prolonged war." The problem? Few possessed that basic knowledge, and those who did were ignored, where his last words are haunted by what he's learned. What do you call this? How could such action be called modern war? I keenly feel the poor liaison of the Japanese forces and the weakness of our military strength. He's not writing about a tactical defeat. He's documenting the death of an illusion that courage, training, and warrior spirit could overcome systematic, industrial-scale logistics. However, a Japanese officer will always believe, until the very last, that there will be movements of our air and naval forces. That belief, that desperate faith in reinforcement that will never come. Oura clings to it even as he acknowledges defeat, even as he notes signs of contracting malaria, even as the artillery continues its mechanical thunder. 6 days after this entry, Japanese forces begin withdrawing from New Georgia. Munda Airfield falls on August 5th, where his fate is unknown. Given the few prisoners taken and the handful who escaped, he almost certainly died there. Another casualty not of American courage, but of American systems. The captured diaries of Pacific War Japanese soldiers reveal a pattern. They start with confidence, progress to confusion, and in bitter realization. A soldier on Makin-Ado writes, "We know we are going to die, so we have no fear of anybody and everyone is high-spirited, but later, we are surrounded by tanks, but we'll stick it out to the finish." What purpose does courage serve when the enemy can afford to surround you with steel, feed their troops ice cream, and dump excess ammunition by the roadside? The American victory in the Pacific wasn't won by better soldiers. Japanese troops were disciplined, brave, often tactically superior in individual engagements. The victory was won before battles started in factories, shipyards, logistics planning rooms. In the unglamorous work of calculating tons per mile, calories per soldier, ammunition expenditure rates, imagine being probational officer Oura in those final days. 27 men under your command. Orders to make advance impossible for an advance and attack to be made from any direction. You've been trained in the warrior traditions, taught that spirit conquers matter, that Japanese forces, outnumbered and outgunned throughout history, have prevailed through superior will. But will doesn't stop artillery. Spirit doesn't feed starving men, and courage, no matter how profound, cannot defeat a system that treats war as an engineering problem to be solved through superior resource allocation. His diary is one of hundreds captured during the Pacific Campaign. The Allies found them everywhere in caves, on bodies, in abandoned positions. Fortunately, one American officer wrote in 1944, "The enemy as a nation is addicted to keeping diaries and converting everything into writing." These diaries provided tactical intelligence, troop movements, positions, plans, but they also documented something more profound: the slow, grinding realization that this war couldn't be won. Not through bravery, not through sacrifice, not through the strength of Japanese spirit that had sustained the empire through centuries. In military academies today, his final diary entry is studied not as tragedy, but as case study. The Pacific War demonstrated what modern warfare had become. Not glory, not heroism, mathematics, the side that can deliver more supplies, feed more troops, replace more losses, and sustain operations longer. That side wins, always. The Americans understood this intuitively. Their culture, built on industrial capitalism and mass production, translated naturally into military logistics. The Japanese, shaped by centuries of warrior tradition where individual prowess mattered more than collective organization, never made the translation until too late. Post-war analysis found that American logistics in the Pacific, despite early difficulties, created what one historian called the only truly functioning theater joint staff of the war. They built ports from nothing, delivered entire armies across oceans, kept troops supplied while Japanese soldiers ate bark and grass. The ink dries on Oura's final entry. Around him, American shells continue their methodical destruction. Above, aircraft circle unmolested, his anti-aircraft guns long since destroyed or out of ammunition. He closes the diary, tucks it away. Perhaps he knows someone will find it. Perhaps he wants someone to understand, not what it felt like to lose, but what it meant. That courage alone was never enough. That the modern age had rendered obsolete the very values he'd been raised to embody. That he and thousands like him were dying not because they lacked warrior spirit, but because warrior spirit itself had become strategically irrelevant. The diary would be found, translated by Nisei interpreters Dioga Ta and Frank Sanmo in 1943, studied by American intelligence, filed away in archives. A testament to a hard truth that every military student now learns. In industrial warfare, systems defeat soldiers. Logistics trump courage. And no amount of fighting spirit can overcome an enemy that's simply better at math. 70 years later, logistics remains the unglamorous heart of military power. The lesson of Oura's diary and hundreds like it echoes through every modern conflict. Not that courage doesn't matter, but that courage without supply chains, without industrial capacity, without systematic logistics, is simply courage waiting to starve. The final irony? Japanese industry after the war would become legendary for logistics efficiency. Toyota's just-in-time manufacturing, lean production systems, the very organizational principles that their military scorned would make Japan an economic superpower. The lesson, learned too late for Oura and his generation, would reshape the world. But on that hillside in New Georgia, in July 1943, all Oura could do was write, document, bear witness. His final entry stands as epitaph for an entire way of thinking about war: brave, noble, and systematically obsolete. In short, as present conditions are, it is a defeat. The rest is silence. The rest is history. The rest is the sound of American shells, falling like clockwork, feeding a system that courage could never defeat.